Hello everyone, thanks for joining me on this week's 172nd Air Wing video review. Today we have the Century Wings Vandy One Tomcat in 1/72nd scale, of course. This one is in the colors of VX4, which is the old US Navy evaluation squadron. So what the VX4 squadron did is they would, as the name suggests, evaluate different weapon systems for integration and validation on US naval fighter aircraft. VX4 specialized in the fighter world. Their related squadron, VX5, was specialists in the air-to-ground and attack aviation side of things. Later on, well after this F-14's time as Vandy One, the VX4, VX5 squadrons would be merged to create what would be known from that point forward as VX9. And that would be a multi-role air-to-ground and air-to-air evaluation squadron. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So first, let's talk about Vandy One, because this color scheme in the black US Navy with the Playboy bunny on the tail setup, this has been around for quite some time, and I haven't seen anyone really talk about why it exists. So let's rewind a little bit to the year 1969. In 1969, your average person could not fly on an airliner because it was just too expensive. At the time, there was an organization called the Civil Aeronautics Board, and this government agency set airfare rates throughout the country. And the cheapest rate for a coach ticket to fly from New York City to Los Angeles circa 1969 was about $5,000 in modern money. So as you can see, the average person was not flying aboard any airliner unless they worked for the government or had a job that paid for their airfare. So for most people, the regime of air travel was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, kind of like the way we look at private jet travel today. So only the, obviously, members of the government and connected and wealthy had access to fly aboard airlines such as Eastern, Pan Am, National, and so forth. So the reason I go into that detail is because when we look at the cultural impact of Hugh Hefner's DC-9 business jet, today it doesn't seem like such a big deal because we have sultans and emirs flying around in Boeing 747s, so it doesn't seem like it'd be a major deal for a business owner to have his own private DC-9 airliner. But back in 1969, again, your average person, or I should say, I guess maybe your average Playboy subscriber, might have been able to afford flying on an airliner maybe once in their lives. It certainly wasn't something that was accessible to the average person, And as such, just getting on board an airliner like we take for granted today in our post-deregulation economic environment would have been a rather special experience. Then you add in the fact that not only is flying on an airliner period a once-in-a-lifetime life experience, you also have the aspect of Hugh Hefner, the king of cool, playboy, and all that. And not only does he have his own private jet, which would have been an amazing accomplishment in 1969 by itself, he has a DC-9, which is a junior airliner by the standards of the time. So he's got a DC-9 and it's set up with all this cool stuff, as you saw in the montage shots earlier. A-track player, onboard bathroom, the whole deal, dance club, premium chef, the whole 9 yards, everything electronic, movie studio, the whole deal. And to have all of that in an airplane owned by your own business in 1969 was kind of a big freaking deal. Again, in the modern sense, we don't really think of that as something major, but again, back in the day, that was a major step forward. So the U.S. Navy was suitably impressed, at least certain members of the U.S. Navy, and in commemoration of Hugh Hefner's ultimate pleasure airplane, F-4 Phantom was mysteriously painted with a Playboy Bunny logo on the tail in one day in 1969. The specifics are somewhat hazy, probably deliberately, but ever since that date, there's always been a black F-4 that had a Playboy Bunny on the tail. And then, of course, when the F-14 joined the fleet, it only made sense that as time went on and the F-4 left the naval community, the F-14 would carry on the torch. And so it did in 1985. So in preparation of the change of command ceremony for Captain Henry M. Kleeman, in 1985, this F-14, Bureau number 161287, was painted in a watercolor flat base black with the Playboy logo on the tail. And it only wore this color scheme for about 10 days in proximity to Captain Henry Kleeman's change of command when he took over command of VX4 from the outgoing commander in charge. Now, bear in mind, Captain Henry M. Kleeman might be a familiar name for some of you F-14 aficionados, as he was the senior ranking officer of commanding of Fighter Squadron VF41 when the 1980s Gulf of Sidra incident happened in Libya, which was only 2 years ahead of when he'd take command of VX4 in 1985. So looks like the man was riding high in his career. Tragically, he had a mishap in an F-14, and the result was he tragically passed away as a result of the crash. But in 1985, when he took over, this F-14 was painted in this commemorative paint scheme with the Playboy Bunny on the back. Now, I would wear this again for a temporary period of time. Afterwards, the next Vandy One was Bureau number 161444. The second Vandy One once again had this similar color scheme. However, there were some differences. So this particular example has a 01 for the Modex here. The second Vandy One F-14 with Bureau number 161444 would see this change, so it would just be the 1. You would not see the 2-digit 01 as is unique to the first Vandy One, like this one here. The other change was that the 01 was also added, or I should say the 1 was also added to the flaps in recognition of U.S. Naval Standard Policy, which was to have the Modex on both the nose and the flaps of the aircraft in question. So this would be the second Vandy One that would serve until it was replaced by the third and final Vandy One Tomcat. That bureau number was 159853. That one had some changes. The stripe here that you see with the blue and white with the stars and the blue and red with the XF insignia, that would be deleted. The XF symbol would be retained. In 1992, the Vandy One Playboy Bunny was, I wouldn't say dishonorably discharged, but let's just say they were separated at the convenience of the government. The change in political leadership in the U.S. Navy in the early 90s, alongside the tailhook scandal of that period, basically put the kibosh on any gender-based expressions of morale, and the Playboy Bunny was summarily sacked from the VX9 at that point, Tomcats. So after 1992, the Playboy Bunny disappeared from the black Vandy One. However, the Vandy One color scheme would continue until the VX9 squadron was disestablished in 2004. The F-14 itself would, of course, be retired from the fleet completely 2 years later in 2006, with the final squadron being Fighter Squadron VF-31. So with all that history outlined, let's get to the fun stuff, which is the model itself. Usually I don't have too many negative things to say about a model because all of the ones on my channel are of my personal collection, and since I spend my own money on these things, I generally try to avoid models that I don't like. It's just, it doesn't make sense for me to spend money on something I wouldn't want to own. So generally I don't have any bad things to say, but unfortunately this Century Wings F-14 surprised me, and not necessarily in a good way. We'll start with the positives. The color scheme is pretty much bang on accurate, including the logos and some of the stenciling and warning labels. The color is flat black, just like the actual airplane. The small details, such as the weapons labeling, is really well done, and as befitting a Century Wings model, the paint work is pretty much on point. The other benefit and positive of the model is you get a comprehensive set of accessories, so you can display this basically any way you like. You can display it with external fuel tanks, Phoenixes, AIM-7s, AIM-9s. You can display it with the pylons. You also have a TARP pod painted completely black. I'm not sure if the TARP system or TARP was ever evaluated by VX4, but you do get one in the box. So if you want to display it in a reconnaissance configuration, you can do that. It's built pretty solidly, so you don't have to worry about breaking stuff and handling the 1/72nd scale model. So in terms of appearances, it is pretty much right on point. So I think it looks pretty cool. This is probably it's right up there with the VF84 Jolly Rogers F-14 Tomcat scheme as being probably one of the most popular color schemes the aircraft ever wore. So I think actually Ward Carroll's channel has a video rating the various color schemes, and he was pointedly clear about excluding the Vandy One from his evaluation. So because I think his video was on operational color schemes. So since Vandy One was part of a technology and evaluation squadron, technically that wouldn't be considered a frontline function. So on that basis, Ward Carroll excluded this color scheme from his rating system, which I suspect he did because if he did include the option of Vandy One, it would just probably dominate the entirety of the charts and render the entire exercise pointless. So I think it looks badass, but that's just me. You do you, but I think this looks really cool. So interesting question I'd like to pose to the group at large. Do you think this looks better than the VF84 1977 Nimitz color scheme? Let me know what your thoughts are below. I'd like to see what the group thinks of Vandy One and how this color scheme works versus the VF84. If you had your own imaginary Tomcat and your own imaginary hangar, and it was legal for you to fly such a thing yourself, and you only had two options of painting it, and those options were this Vandy One color scheme or the VF84 Jolly Rogers color scheme, which would you pick? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. So in terms of the appearance of the model, coming back to the review of things, it's pretty much right on. So this brings me to the flaws, and unfortunately there were more in store for me than I was bargained for. The first is on the left side of the cockpit. There was some white paint streaking that I had to remove. I took some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip and just buffed some of that out. So it's not a major concern for me, but yeah, that was disheartening to see after I did the quote-unquote darkroom shots for the montage you saw earlier. And that wasn't the end of the problems, unfortunately. The sidewinders that you see here, a little hidden behind the wing there, but the sidewinders, I had to sand down the mounting posts for that, the mounting dowels, because they simply did not fit. The back dowels fit, the front ones did not. period. There was just no way. They were too wide. So I had to file those down, which is the first time I've ever had to do that on a Century Wings product, and that is not a positive thing. So that was also not the end of the fitment issues. The landing gear uses magnets to retain it to the fuselage, which I have to tip my hat to. That is fairly creative, and that's something that Century Wings does deserve some recognition for. However, the magnet on the front landing gear right here came off of the landing gear and was stuck to the bottom of the fuselage. So I had to pull that out with tweezers and glue it to the landing gear piece that it was supposed to have been attached to from the very beginning. And right now, the tail hook right here and the left side afterburner can is being held onto the model with blue tack, because neither of those parts fit on the box. You can put them in, and then 10 seconds later, you pick the model up and they just fall right out. So definitely some issues with some of the fitment on this, and I was not happy to see that. Another point to note out is that the compressor faces on the front are black. That should be silver, honestly. And I realized they just painted the same color as the rest of the tooling, but still, if you can see the compressor face of the F-14 on this model, I would like to see it be a silver color, reflecting the fact that the jet engine is not going to be black face like the rest of the airplane is. Then speaking of jet engines, I would also like to see that the burner cans here, the termination of the burner can should be further into the fuselage. Right here, it's basically almost at the end of the burner cans, which is not accurate to what you would actually see on a TF-30 Tomcat. So I feel like Century Wings has kind of kept this tooling around for a long time, and they haven't necessarily made some updates that probably should have happened to it. In recent years, companies like Caliber Wings have certainly improved their F-14, and even the bargain offering from JC Wings has had some important updates done to it in terms of some of the details. So I'd like to see Century Wings tighten up their ship a little bit and make some updates to their F-14 tooling, because I think it would make this look really nice. So yeah, there's some flaws on that, and to me it's not necessarily a deal breaker to the point where I want to like do a Ron Swanson and just toss it in the nearest junkster or nearest junk bin or whatever. But you know, there are some flaws to understand, especially if you're shopping this on the secondary market, which brings me to the final flaw that I'd like to point out, which is getting a hold of these things after they sell on retail is rather difficult. So I feel a little schizophrenic on this, but I would recommend it if you are a fan of F-14s and the Vandy One color scheme, just because if you are watching this in proximity to January 2023, you probably want to step on getting one of these, because they tend to sell out quick, because it's a very popular color scheme, and once it sells out, you can forget about getting another one at a reasonable price. I have seen these sell for $300 on the secondary market. So knowing that, and the fact that I do like the color scheme, and I also like the fact that Ace Combat took kind of their own riff of this in putting the black F-14 in Ace Combat 5, which is like an origin story for me, because when I was a kid and I played that game, I love the Rosgrees F-14s, which are, for those who don't know, it's kind of a blend of the Vandy One that you see here and the Jolly Rogers VF84 Tomcats. So the Ace Combat 5 color scheme is loosely based off of this. So there's a soft place in my heart for the Vandy One color. And it does harken back to a different time in U.S. culture. So whether you think of that as a positive or a negative, I leave to the viewer. But for those reasons, I have it in my collection, and I think if you're somebody who is looking at this and thinking, you know, maybe you'd get it later, but you're not real keen on getting it now, I would just get it right away, because if you don't like it, you can probably sell it and recoup most of your cost. Whereas if you want to get it later and it's all sold out, good luck. Don't wait. So that's why I picked this one up. Yes, there are some flaws, but on balance, if you are a fan of the color scheme and you have some Q-tips and rubbing alcohol handy, just pick one of these up. If you have the older ones, don't sell it and get this one. But Again, coming back to the availability subject, you probably can't get one of the previous releases anyway. So yeah, so with that in mind, if you're a fan of getting the very first Vandy One in your collection, I would recommend picking this up. Bear in mind that there are some minor flaws to consider, and you probably want to get your modeling file out and ready if the parts don't necessarily fit. I do want to make a disclaimer that this is a sample of one, so I may have just been the unlucky guy that got the wrong one in the shipment, and everyone else's is perfectly fine. But just so you all aware, in full disclosure, those are the flaws that I've encountered with this particular one that's in my collection. So thank you for watching my video to this point. Please leave your comments and feedback in the section below. And if you are a fan of my videos and of 172nd airplane models or aviation history, consider subscribing. That way you'll be notified when I upload my newest video, which I generally do every Sunday morning. So if you are a fan of this kind of information and background, definitely consider subscribing so you'll be made aware once again, and you'll know when I upload my next video. So it also tells me when and how I'm doing a good job. So the more people subscribe, the more incentivized I am to make these videos. So and for those of you that have more immediate feedback, there's a comment section once again. So thank you for watching. Have a good one, folks.